Welcome boys and girls, Costin here with my unit tier list for the Tomb Kings in Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires. We don't know what Creative Assembly is going to add for the Tomb Kings or for the Vampire Counts or Coast in Lord's End Times, but I imagine with Nagash especially, it's either going to be a bunch of unique units only for him, for his faction, for his quote-unquote race, or it's going to be undead units across the board that all races will benefit from, or some of them. Since Nagash was a Tomb King, or a ruler of Nehekara, or Khemri, I think it stands to reason that the Tomb Kings are certainly going to get units in the end time. So maybe this tier list is going to change quite a bit, or maybe the Tomb Kings are going to get some benefits in end times, but we'll find out about that, I guess, at the end of summer, maybe early September. Anyway, starting with Skeletal Warriors, I would say an F tier unit very, very easily for this list. There's almost no reason to recruit Skeletal Warriors when you can recruit Skeletal Spearmen. And the benefit of Skeletal Spearmen, when you look at these kind of units, these filler units, because they're both filler units, let's be very clear on that. You can recruit an infinite amount of them, but you only really want to recruit them if you have nothing else to recruit. But one is better than the other because even with the rest of the army built up, having a couple of units of Skeletal Spearmen until you get obviously something better, you know, while you're still building up your army, while you're still getting tiers, or maybe for a secondary army, Skeletal Spearmen are just the better unit. Both of them have the same kind of durability against range, same armor, but one of them has an anti-large benefit and a charge defense versus large. The other one doesn't. Sure, they don't have the same attack capability, but with these kind of early game chaff infantry units, you're looking for as much durability or line holding capability as you can get. And that doesn't matter for the Tomb Kings when you consider the ranged and more importantly the artillery capability of them. So flank protection for the Tomb Kings, especially when you're going to be fighting a lot of the times outnumbered in the early game, is rather important compared to a unit that just deals a bit more damage but doesn't have the same line holding capability. And that's why one unit is not almost never worth recruiting unless you're just throwing around army slots for no good reason, or you just want to do it for the sake of fun. The other one is if you're looking to recruit anything and you have no other options. Then you have Nehekaran Warriors. I'm also going to put these guys in C tier, and the reason is they're still a filler unit. Yes, they require a barracks, but you're not getting the barracks for Nehekaran Warriors. Let's be very clear on that subject. You're getting the barracks for the sake of Tomb Guards. And Nehekaran Warriors are just the first step on that road to getting Tomb Guard. They're not the best infantry units, far from it. They're the way I treat them most of the time in every campaign is like, if I can recruit anything better, I recruit stuff that's better. If I have no other option, I recruit Nehekaran Warriors and Skeletal Spearmen. That's where I stand on the subject, and you will certainly have a good amount of capacity for Nehekaran Warriors. And look, being in C tier doesn't mean a unit is bad, it's just a unit you don't always want to recruit. Like when you're looking at these tier lists, S, A, and B are the units that you almost always want to recruit. C and D, situational, especially D tier. F is almost never worth recruiting, except, you know, some very, very specific circumstances, and even then it's the question is like, could I recruit anything else? Any other thing? That's kind of how you treat the tier rankings over here. Then we have Skeletal Archers. I'm also going to put these guys in C tier. The reasoning being is like, you will get a huge amount of capacity, and they do give you range capability. It's not especially good range capability, just like Skeletal Spearmen and Nehekaran Warriors are not especially good melee capability. It's just what you got. Like, that's kind of the issue with Tomb Kings. You have these barracks that increase unit capacity, but the units you're increasing capacity for are not really that great. But you know, a filler army, a filler Tomb King army, or a throwaway army, or like a secondary, tertiary army that you get may have a good amount of these units all around, just because the unit capacity certainly increases by quite a bit through the barracks chain. Not great units, but hey, at least it's some range capability. You know, it's kind of hilarious when you think about skeletal archers, is that when you compare it to the Vampire Coast, Tomb Kings at least have some decent level of leadership and survivability and army-wide healing, which, yeah, you look at the poor Vampire Coast situation. Then we have Tomb Guard. I'm going to say regular Tomb Guard are a B tier unit. One could argue they deserve a much higher spot, but really, they're just okay infantry units. They're not exceptional compared to other races. They're not going to win infantry duels on their own. They lack the durability and the damage dealing capability to do so. But you can get a good amount of capacity for Tomb Guard, and you certainly will have a bunch of capacity to spare. So the progression stage of a Tomb King campaign is like you start with these units being filler, and then Tomb Guard kind of end up being filler because you have Tomb Guard with halberds that require the previous tier of the barracks chain, and you will have more capacity of regular Tomb Guard than Tomb Guard with halberds. Sure, you can get the Book of Nagash, the 5th Book of Nagash, which gives you a lot. You have benefits, etc., and so on. But still, you're going to have more Tomb Guards than Tomb Guards with halberds. Tomb Guards with halberds are just the far superior unit. Anti-large, armor-piercing capability. Sure, they might not seemingly do the same level of damage until you consider they have freaking armor-piercing capability. And then they do, and surpass it. The Tomb Guard are always a bit of a weird unit to talk about because there's a bunch of research benefits which you can get rather quickly, actually, in a Tomb King campaign that buffed them by quite a bit. And since these are the mainstay infantry units of your army, you might want to pick up those benefits. Just something worth considering. But yeah, Tomb Guard with halberds, not the best infantry unit. They're not going to win against Chosen. But you want to protect your phalanx, you want to deal with most enemy cavalry units, these are the units you want to get. Then we move on to cavalry, where we have skeletal horsemen, Nehekaran horsemen, skeletal horse archers, and yes, all of them are in F tier. This is one of the painful aspects of the cavalry building chain for the Tomb Kings. There's some cool stuff at higher tiers of that cavalry building chain, but these guys aren't it. The problem with skeletal horsemen is they're a crappy light cavalry unit that might even be surpassed by dervishes in a Kislev campaign. Nehekaran horsemen are kind of what you would consider a medium cavalry unit, but just not effective. Like, when you look at a cavalry unit, why are you looking at from a cavalry perspective? You're either looking at a cavalry unit that's going to skirmish and be effective at dealing with enemy range and artillery, and these guys are not going to be it. You're looking at shock cavalry potential. They don't have that capability. Or you're looking at staying power potential, like cavalry unit. You use their enhanced mobility to get to a corner of the battlefield, and then you can hold the line, or you can just throw them in the line and hold their own. That's what Knights of the Black Rose do for the Empire. These guys don't have it. As for horse archers, the perspective with skirmisher or range cav units is that either they're good, you look at pistoliers or outriders for the Empire, or outriders with grenade launchers, and you want to get a couple of them, not too many, there are reasonable limits, or they're not that great, in which case you might want to get one. But for the Tomb Kings, you don't want any. Part of the reason is the way the building chains are designed, and archer chariots are just better at the job. They're going to do overall a better job at like harassing the enemy. The only reason you might get a unit, even if it's not good, like you look at Illyrian archers or horse archers for the high elves, is to harass the enemy to get them out of position so they attack their prepared position. But that's what archer chariots can do, and it's better to go for the chariot building than it is to go for the cavalry building chain, at least at this tier. If you're going for the cavalry building chain, it's almost always for the higher tier unit, so it's only something you really want to do in like a provincial capital or once you get to tier 3, because that's the only time it's worth it. The chariot building, it's similar with chariots, sure, but the chariot payoff at tier 3 is certainly substantial. Then we have Necropolis Knights. I kind of feel sad about Necropolis Knights because they're both excellent units. Not S tier units, but they're both pretty good units. So you have the regular one, the halberd version. The way I would describe these guys is they're kind of like the Tomb King version of demigryphs. Whether or not who wins in a duel is a bit of a discussion. It depends on poison. Like, demigryphs have better stats, but these guys have poison. And remember, Tomb Kings do have army healing ability, or army-wide healing once they take enough damage. So just something worth pointing out on that subject. The halberd version, of course, is better against anti-large, so they're an anti-cav-cav. The downside is you can only get so much capacity because the halberd version requires you to get a tier 4 building, so it's only going to work in provincial capitals. On the flip side, you can concern necrotects, and you can increase their capacity with the necrotect. Whether or not you want to use that capacity, because it is a skill line choice, Tomb Scorpions, Ushabti, or Necropolis Knights, that is a different discussion. But if you're looking to get a cavalry unit in a Tomb King campaign, these are the only ones that are really worth it, from my perspective. They'll hold their own against pretty much any other cavalry unit. I mean, sure, Skull Crushers would win. Cast Knights, I think that's a bit of a discussion, really, with regards to Cast Knights. I'd probably give it to Cast Knights of Khorne, especially. But still, they're quite effective in what a cavalry is supposed to be. They're effective in both roles, even. Like, they're effective in terms of standing and fighting, though halberds are especially effective as shock cavalry or anti-cav-cav. Then we have Carrion. I think this unit is universally agreed to be the single worst unit in the game overall. A very weak, low damage, low durability flying unit. You might think that the flexibility that it has as a flying unit makes it worthwhile, but it certainly does not. The only reason you even get these guys is because you benefit from the building that increases your capacity, but even then, it's just flat out better to get more skeletal spearmen than it is to get Carrion in an army. They're not going to be able... They would struggle to wipe out the crews of an artillery unit, let alone any actual ranged unit on the battlefield. Next up, we have the chariots for the Tomb Kings. So first off, we have regular Tomb King chariots, the melee chariots. They're not the best chariots in the game. They're not the worst chariots in the game. They can get the job done. I would say they're overshadowed by the fact that the ranged chariots are flat out better than these guys are. And the problem with chariot units, anything that has more than 4 models per unit, 4 entities per unit as a chariot, does tend to struggle with pathfinding. But if you're looking for a chariot unit to, do some flanking attacks, this is the one you want to get. In fact, they're much better at that job than the Nehecaran horsemen or skeletal horsemen are in a Tomb King campaign. Then we have archer chariots, ranged chariots. These guys, I would say, they have a decent level of melee capability, but they also have that range capability, so they can harass the enemy. Don't expect them to do a lot of range damage, but their primary role in an army is going to be that harassment role they're going to provide. They can get an enemy army, let's say you attack an enemy army and you're stronger than them. They might just try and turtle up, play defensive. If you send one of these units to attack them, they are going to attack your corner camp or your prepared position, whatever that may be. That's the thing with ranged and artillery. You may want to fight in a specific corner of the battlefield, and these guys are the way you do so. Besides, they're just generally useful if you're going to harass the enemy. Most of the time, I don't get a lot of these guys. They're not sleds or even war wagons or pistoliers and outriders. But having 1 or 2 of them per army can be useful in certain situations. You could consider them a filler unit. Whether or not it's worth going for the entire cavalry building chain whatsoever is its own discussion in a Tomb King campaign. From my perspective, it's probably better to get it at tier 4 than it is to get the construct building that only gives you 1 unit capacity, but that's where I stand. Then we have Ushabti. Both Ushabti units are, from my view, S tier. So regular Ushabti are good against low-level infantry units, so they're good at dealing with chaff. They can also hold their own against a wide variety of units throughout the course of your campaign, and you are incentivized to get the building they come from because it's going to give you Ushabti with great bows. And Ushabti with great bows are just flat-out phenomenal units, really, in a campaign. They can do a lot of damage, they're pretty durable, especially when you think of them as undead units. They're pretty okay in melee as well. So as far as ranged units go, these guys are phenomenal. Like, they're still monsters, ultimately. They're still constructs. And between their range and their damage, they can kill legendary lords quite effectively. Like, think of Scarbrand. It's like, he's target practice for a couple of these units, or the Regiment Renowned version. Then we have Sepulchral Stalkers. I'm going to put these guys in B tier. It's kind of weird. So, they're an okay unit, not the best unit. The magical attacks, good amount of range damage, but they struggle somewhat in range, and obviously they don't necessarily have the best melee capability. Hybrid units are always weird to quantify in a lot of respects. I would probably rank them higher in some ways because you can get these guys at tier 3. They can be useful, I would say, either in front of your infantry line or just behind it to support it. But yeah, I find them a bit awkward to use in a battle. Technically, they are great. It's just that kind of awkwardness that comes with using them. You know, personally, I'm a bigger fan of Ushabti. I don't know, I just find that Ushabti generally are more of a useful unit. At least Ushabti with great bows. The difference between these guys and regular Ushabti, well, bit of a discussion on that subject, but one's a tier 2 unit, the other one's a tier 3 unit that requires you to get the cavalry building chain. Sure, you can increase capacity with the Necrotech because you increase capacity for Necropolis Knights and Sepulchral Stalkers, but still. Then we have Tomb Scorpions. So, Tomb Scorpions, yeah, definitely an A tier unit, like, without the discussion on the subject. One, you can get a huge level of capacity for them with Necrotechs, like, far more so than most other units. Two, as far as single entities go, yeah, they're not the strongest, but they're also not the big, massive, hulking target that other single entities tend to be during the course of a campaign. These are kind of like the way you would describe them, line breakers. One could discuss the pros and cons of the fact that they come from their own exclusive building. Yeah, I think some redesign of the building tier chains for Tomb Kings would be in order. But still, I find Tomb Scorpions to be a rather effective unit. Then we have Sphinxes. Oh yes, the big single entity. So let's start with what is it? War Sphinxes. So War Sphinxes, pretty solid infantry, pretty solid monstrous unit, pretty effective at getting the job done, though not as good as Necrosphinxes. So Necrosphinxes, if you're going to get any big single entity for the Tomb Kings, I would definitely go with Necrosphinxes. You are going to have to decide not just where you increase capacity with respect to the buildings, because you will only have so many provincial capitals, but where you're going to increase the Necrotics. And I think Necrosphinxes are just really the way to go. They just kind of have that extra bit of edge. Hera Titans, I'm gonna go with B tier. They look cooler than they actually are. They're dangerous. Don't get me wrong. They're dangerous. They're a very cool looking unit. Undeniably so. They have that awesome factor to them. But at the same time, it's not the best single entity in terms of pure combat capability. They don't have the same kind of mobility as the War Sphinxes or Necrosphinxes on the battlefield, and range capability Bone Giants are just flat out going to be better. Speaking about Bone Giants, I'm also going to put these guys in B tier. Big single entity range unit. Sounds great. Till you realize it's a big hulking target that, you know, you get into range duels, it's going to get hit by literally everything. It's going to be target practice for everything. Again, you know, B tier is not bad units. It's just not necessarily units that are as useful as those in A and S tier. I mean, I do usually get Bone Giants on, like, say, Hydro Titans. I think Constructs, it's, again, always just choice, and I just think War Sphinxes and Necrosphinxes are the better one. Then we have Screaming Skulls. Without a doubt, S-tier artillery unit. You increase capacity at tier 3. They're quite effective. They do a good amount of damage. They reduce enemy leadership. What's there not to like? Well, maybe the projectile natures, but the AI is not particularly great at dodging these. Unlike mortars, looking at you, Vampire Coast, on this subject. And then we do have Casket of Souls. I know, limited capacity, though Creative Assembly has vastly improved the situation in terms of the right cooldown. These are the only units that are not disposable in a Tomb King campaign, because you only get one every 10 turns, and that's assuming you do the right on cooldown. And even then, if you lose one, you're not getting it back. On the flip side, as far as artillery units go, I mean, sure, it's a single entity, and that has its problems. It's not a Dreadquake, one could argue. But definitely I would be just flat out wrong to say that Casket of Souls is not an S-tier unit, because these things are some of the most terrifying freaking units to face in a battle if you're ever fighting Tomb Kings, and the most devastating units that you can bring in a battle if you are playing as the Tomb Kings. I mean, the fact Katep has one as a mount is... Well, let's just say fighting against Katep might seem fun in games until he brings this thing as a mount, and then it becomes a whole different game altogether. And that is where I stand on Tomb Kings. Was I too harsh with the units in F tier? I don't think so. But, you know, the way tier lists work is you don't have to have a balanced number in every slot. And yeah, I definitely think the units in F tier are never worth really recruiting. It just... except for fluff. And even then, with Carrion, I'm just really wondering, why are you wasting army slots? Like, I can understand some of the other units in F tier. I really would struggle to understand the value of ever recruiting Carrion in a campaign. That's all I had to say. Costin signing out.